So, how are you doing? I hope you guys can cope with my rather raspy voice today. So I'm just going to continue. Why am I talking about this? Some of you have the experience of recognizing a big moment idea and taking a moonshot to make it a reality. So if you saw Mikhail's talk, for example, yesterday, he spoke about the Pyrenees Challenge, and I'm talking about that kind of experience. For those who haven't had this experience, you'll likely face this at least once in your career. When you do, it's probably going to be risky for your project, team, or company. And you'll feel daunted. You'll want to just stick to a conventional solution. So I'm going to share my experience of handling such a situation and the benefits it provided. Through this example, I also want to highlight how your front-end application can go way beyond just handling the UI and interactivity. My name is VINU NAIR, and I'm an engineer at ManyChat. I'm also an ex-startup founder and a mentor for startups. Outside of work, you'll likely find me traveling somewhere in Europe, or even planning my next trip. So, ManyChat, that's where I work. If you haven't heard of us already, it's the leading chat automation platform out there. Check out this beautiful website we have. Here's the small business owner who gets to relax because ManyChat is handling the tough conversations for him. Small businesses just don't have the capacity to handle significant inbound messages. So we help by responding to them with automation logic, and all through the most popular channels out there, like WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger, and TikTok. The platform is also available in web and mobile platforms. So let's get back to my journey. 2 years ago, our mobile app supported sending voice messages through live chat, and it was garnering over 5,000 message sends per day. At the same time, the most requested feature from our community was voice messaging in web. The feature was especially required in regions where the default mode of communication between customers and businesses was via voice notes in WhatsApp. You can think of Brazil as a good example of this. And it was at this point that only 3 weeks after joining the company, our product manager decided this was going to be the main focus. So without this feature, how the platform was working is users had to record the voice message in a third-party application and also in the right format, upload that in live chat, and then send the message to customers. So you can imagine with a conversation doing this once, twice, 5 times, maybe even 10 times, that's quite realistic. And it would just not work this way. So we had to solve this problem. So after doing some really high-level research, I discovered that browsers have the media recorder and media stream APIs. So this should be a really simple solution. Use the browser APIs to record media, package that with the required MIME types, and then use existing endpoints to send the data as an attachment. So when we had our PBR, I was asked to estimate the size of this task. And I promised it could be done in 1 sprint, just 2 weeks. So although on the Zoom display, I could see everyone's faces and they had like some skeptical looks, there was no objection, so we went ahead. However, what happened was, what ended up being the sprint that was meant to implement the entire solution actually ended up being an eye-watering research, exposing what was actually required. And that was a complex process of detecting browser-supported formats, comparing that with channel-supported API formats, determining when conversions is necessary, uploading that, and then sending it finally. And then if you think about playback, it's actually the same challenge because playback and recording formats in browsers aren't the same. So in this situation, like many of you, I'm pretty sure, where would you go to find an out-of-the-box solution? NPM, right? The solution for everything. Unfortunately, when I did my search, I could only find some hobbyist projects. And yeah, like, that's not going to happen for a professional platform in production. So when I looked at the mobile application, which already had this feature, I noticed that browsers work very differently from native devices. JavaScript has clear limitations, especially for low-level applications like conversion. So the mobile implementation wasn't transferable, apart from understanding the UI and UX. So I hope you woke up. At this point, it was just easy to give up and just hand over the fancy, complex conversion step to a backend or infrastructure engineer. But there was something different about the situation. By some random chance, I actually ended up being the only web developer and front-end developer in the team that was able to work on this because the backend guys weren't available for the next 3 months. And in that moment, this desire or spark to do better came about, and the moonshot was born. So fast forwarding a bit, this moonshot was actually comprised of the following tools and technologies, which I've tried to represent here like an Apple product launch slide. I hope you got it. But let me take you through the highlights. So the first step was to solve the biggest known complicated part, and that was conversion. So for that, the solution is FFmpeg, which is the most widely used tool for media transcoding. With WASM, JavaScript applications can interface with almost any module that runs natively on device. But instead of figuring this out from scratch, I decided to use a library called ffmpeg.wasm because it provides a pre-built WASM and the web worker to build a quick proof of concept. The playground and utilities from this library also help me configure the conversion according to our requirements. And with that, I got localhost to work. So I'm sure a lot of you have implemented something and you get it to work in localhost and you think that's the end of the line. But it's not. Because then came deployment. And if you look at this line of code, for example, it looks really simple in terms of spinning up a web worker. However, it requires a meta URL import. Now, this meta URL ensures that the import part still works after files are renamed, hashed, or moved to another directory by the bundler. I solved this at the time using a plugin for ESBuild. But now that we've moved to VIJY, this is no longer a problem. Another issue was actually to solve cause errors. Now, browsers enforce that web worker files be served from the same domain as the web application. In our case, we were using a CDN, so we had a different domain. And we weren't going to change that, so I needed to find a workaround. And this snippet is actually a utility that's provided by ffmpeg.wasm, and it really helped to solve the problem. So I'm going to just dissect that. The workaround here is that instead of the worker file being downloaded as a script file, we could actually download it via an HTTP fetch request. Then convert the raw data into a blob, create an object URL to that blob, and then import it via meta URL, which we already support, thanks to the plugin. After that, there was another challenge. Now, all of us React developers have at some point needed to optimize the bundle size. right? Like, it's always a concern. When users are using sketchy mobile networks, it's really important that the functionality you develop still works. So, without optimizations, the gzipped file size for the FFmpeg WASM module was 11.3 megabytes. But thankfully, through a painful process of customizing this FFmpeg build, the size was reduced to just 900 kilobytes. And that's a 12.5 times smaller size. Now, before I continue, I want to just reflect back at what happened, right? I showed you all the challenges that was faced, but there's a human aspect to this. The journey was exhilarating and growth-inducing, but if you saw me around the office, it looked like I was fighting demons to get the solution to work. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. It was a scary time, and I was seeking help from every expert I could find in the company to talk about ES build, how we set it up, have we done anything different before, how the build process could be changed. And luckily, I got the answers. Now, when I think about it, you know, AI wasn't even the same as what it was today. Gosh, when I say that, it sounds like I worked on this project 10 years ago. Well, it was actually time to celebrate. After those big challenges, we had a working solution, at least according to our internal testing. So we decided to release the feature in just one channel, WhatsApp. And the results were not that great. While the feature worked well for us developers using modern MacBooks for development and testing, our users were facing a different problem: hardware limitations. So, as like a last effort to get this to work, I tried to ensure that the FFmpeg environment had sufficient memory to run. You know, when users are having multiple tabs open and the browser is itself trying to manage memory, it's really hard to predict what can happen. However, this didn't help. So was it all a failure? No, definitely not. We did have to roll back the feature because it was too difficult to solve the problems observed in production. However, the efforts were not in vain. By this time, there was backend capacity to solve this, and moving the conversion step to the backend made the feature 100% reliable. So what did we learn? When you take a moonshot, your team, and the company benefit from growth. If you happen to be alone in the situation, just know that there are likely experts in your company who can help you, and it's a great way to engage with them. I was really disappointed when the front-end solution didn't work, but that's because I didn't set the right expectations. So just make sure you do that. And lastly, don't underestimate what your front-end application can do. I actually looked for some examples. These are examples where you could be using them every day, and you just don't realize that a WASM is actually helping the functionality to work. And these are Figma, Google Earth, Google Meet, and a very interesting one called Bolt. With Bolt, it actually uses something called Stack Blitz web containers to run Node.js applications in the browser itself. This means when users are trying to build AI-generated applications, they can have a sandbox that runs an entire server on the client side. Now that's the power I'm talking about. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I really hope that my example and some of the examples out there inspire you to build some pioneering front-end web applications in the future. Thank you.